hope that all of you enjoyed a beautiful celebration of Thanksgiving a few days ago. Began this long weekend, that you were together with family and friends and loved ones, feasting in thanks for all the good things we are constantly given. We have the joy now of having a deacon proclaiming the gospel. Last week, because anything that comes that's not the usual, I totally miss. All the parts of the liturgy that a deacon does, that deacon was not allowed to do last Sunday. So you'll hear her voice more and see her moving in service this week. This Sunday of Christ the King, this conclusion of the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, which we have just heard. What would it be like if we took it seriously? What would it be like if we took Jesus at his word? That our very salvation, whether we spend eternity in God's presence in joy, or eternity in devastating sorrow apart from God, is not only connected to, or tied up with, or related to, but is, as he says in these words we've heard this morning, determined by what I have done or failed to do for those whom he calls the least of these. Would it be like the story I heard told this week by a woman who's a United Methodist elder who had a meeting of her youth group, and at the end of the meeting, and our youth group may have done this through the years, at the end of the meeting they had the hunger banquet. And what happens is, just by chance, different groups and individuals receive the equivalent of the food that's available to that percentage of people around the world. So that afternoon, one sizable group among the youth there received to share among themselves one bowl of rice. Another fairly sizable group received to share among themselves one bowl of rice and beans. A smaller group received a bowl of rice and beans as well. And finally, one person received a platter filled with deli meats and cheese and bread. That day, the member of the youth group that received that deli platter full of meat and cheese and bread was, and unfortunately this often can happen, was the girl that dressed differently and talked differently, that a lot of the other kids thought was weird, that the group often ridiculed and made fun of, either in or out of her hearing. She received the plenty. And the woman who was running the youth group, that United Methodist elder, looked over a moment later to the girl who had received the platter with all the food, and she was crying. And she went over to her and she said, "Why are you crying?" And the girl responded, "Because it shouldn't be like this." And she asked her, "Like what?" "That I should have all this, and they have so little." And the leader asked her, "What do you want to do?" And she said, "I want to share." And she went from person to person in the group and made for them, according to their specifications, a sandwich and placed it in their hand. When she was finished, and when they had eaten, the other kids in the group said to her, it was brave to ask, they said, "Why did you do that? You got all that good stuff. You didn't have to share it with us, and we don't really like you. We think you're bizarre. We think we'd be a better group if you weren't with us. Why did you do that?" And she responded, "Because I know what it feels like not to be invited. And I don't want anyone else to feel the same way." Maybe if we took Jesus' words today seriously, it would be like that. Or maybe if we took Jesus' words today seriously, it would be like the lyrics of a song by Phil Wickham, a modern Christian singer in our own time. This song of his is called "The Jesus Way." And these are the lyrics. "If you curse me, then I will bless you. If you hurt me, I will forgive. And if you hate me, then I will love you. I choose the Jesus way. If you're helpless, I will defend you. If you're burdened, I'll share the weight. And if you're hopeless, then let me show you there's hope in the Jesus way. If you strike me, I will embrace you. And if you chain me, I'll sing his praise. And if you kill me, my home is in heaven, for I choose the Jesus way." Maybe it would be like that. Maybe it would be like 2 Wednesday evenings ago when I went and spent time at the Mustard Seed, the Catholic worker house here on Piedmont Street in the middle of Worcester. There were about 30 volunteers there that night from St. Francis and Holden. And there were about 75 men and women there coming to share the meal that was being served. And those 75 people, they were rough and ready. Some of them were eating outside. It was about 35 degrees. Some of them were having a good time together, sharing stories together. Some of them were telling each other off. I saw one woman with, well, she was able to do it. This guy said something to her she didn't like, and boy, he was on the ground. Next thing you know. But there, according to what Jesus says today in Matthew 25, I was in the presence of Christ. Each one of them. All of them. Not because of anything they ever did or didn't do, but simply because they are. In the same way, this afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. here in our parking lot, as we do from month to month, we'll be distributing food to those who choose to just come and ask. And if we take the words of Jesus today seriously, as those cars drive up, often in the wrong direction, as the windows open and we ask how many are in your family, we will not be talking to people who remind us of the gospel. We will not be talking to people who remind us of Jesus the Christ in every car, in every face, in every voice. Whatever be their story, known and unknown, we will be in the presence of Jesus Christ. The words we hear today in the gospel are the last words Jesus spoke publicly before he went to his Last Supper and was betrayed and tried and tortured and executed and buried. And it seems in the Gospels that he had every sense that all that was coming and was that near. And you and I, if we're standing finally, or perhaps lying on a peaceful bed, and we know that our last breath is within the next few minutes, what we choose to say, what we want to be heard by those who are gathered around us in that moment, will be our absolute truth. What we learned over a life, and what, of everything we might say, we want those with us to hear, to understand, and to take to heart. Jesus' words to us this morning, brothers and sisters, are nothing less than a call to obedience. Obedience to him as King. He doesn't say, I'd like you to feed the hungry. I'd like you to clothe the naked. It would be wonderful if you made room for the homeless. It would be a good thing if you took care of the sick, if you visited those in prison. No. He calls us to do those things. And he empowers us to do those things. The first chapter of the letter to the Ephesians today tells us, without any doubt, that the power the church is given to obey what Christ says today is exactly the same power God exhibited in raising Christ from the dead. It's that power. God put this power to work in Christ when he raised Christ from the dead. And God places that same power in your hands and mine. And if I'm tempted, and I have been all my life, to hesitate to do any of those things he calls upon me in obedience to do today, if we take seriously what he says, if I fail to decide whether to do it or not, whether to obey or not, then I fail to do it. By not choosing, I choose to be among those who today's gospel terms the goats. By refusing to choose, I refuse to act faithfully. And I don't even want to read aloud to you again the last sentence of today's gospel, when Jesus speaks of the end, the eternal arrival point of those who refuse to obey. It doesn't have to be major. It doesn't have to be amazing stuff we do. But it has to be faithful. It has to be real. It has to be face to face. I can't visit the sick without going to sit by their bed. The same with prisoners. I can't clothe the naked unless I go and find them, carrying with me what they need. I can't give homes to the homeless unless I come to know who they are, what their names are, what the stories of their lives are, why they are where they are today. Since my mother's death at what was then the Little Sisters of the Poor home in Somerville, now run by, and wonderfully so, by the Visiting Nurses Association, I've been going over most Fridays just to do a morning service of prayer with them in the chapel there, to keep up acquaintance with them. And after the pandemic ended, which had not been able to happen until then, one of the people in charge of the place asked me if I would make a visit when I came to a woman who was bedridden on the 4th floor. I said I'd be glad to. And each week when we finished praying together downstairs and everybody went their way, I would take the elevator up to the 4th floor to meet first and then to visit and sometimes to help feed lunch to Mary. Often with her there was her friend Shirley. They had known each other for 40 years. They both worked in the same school in Lawrence, the same elementary school. They weren't teachers, they weren't administrators, they weren't teachers' aides. They were the people who kept the school clean, and some of them were the people who fed kids at lunchtime. Mary had 3 children, but she rarely saw them. I would go up there, and let me tell you, glance to the left as I came down the corridor into the room where I sat with my mother on the last day of her life, the room in which she died. And I'd get to Mary, and I'd greet her, ask her how she was. She'd ask me how I was. We'd exchange the news of the day. I'd pray for her and turn and leave. Probably in total, I was 20 minutes in her presence. I may have told you before, the funniest thing was the first day. When I turned after meeting her and Shirley and heading back down the corridor, I was almost to the elevator and I could hear them talking, because they were talking loudly because Mary was deaf. As I would turn the corner toward the elevator, Mary said, "I don't know who he is, but he's beautiful." I don't know what she meant, unless she had never seen a guy before. Thursday night, Thanksgiving night, I called the activities person there and said, I'm not going to be able to get over on Friday. Maybe you can let Mary know. And she said she's been moved to Mass General. She's on palliative care. And I said, okay, is it all right for me to visit her over there at the beginning of the week? She said yes. Then she texted me as I woke up Friday morning to tell me that Mary had died during the night. Sisters and brothers, as I sit here with you this morning, I tell you that I believe that perhaps more than many of the things I've done for years, teach, administer, pastor in parishes, it may be that 20 minutes total of coming to Jesus there in that bed in need. That may be, if I am counted among the sheep, the reason why. The great 16th century reformer, St. John of the Cross, summed it all up powerfully in one sentence. In the evening of life, we will be judged on love alone.